Welcome back to the World of the Mind. I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps. In our last episodes, we saw both the nature of language and also the nature of a variety of animal communication systems that simply aren't language because they, in aggregate, lack many of the features that language actually has. But a very good question there, and if you're trying to understand the nature of human versus non-human animal, is what exactly are the animals not doing that we are doing? In other words, is it possible for any form of non-human animal to do language at all, or as we saw in our last episode, are call systems, which are not productive. You can't say brand new things in them. They're not displacement. You can't talk about things that are not present in space or time with a call system, even though they may be very sophisticated in a variety of ways. We talked about the vervet monkey, and we talked briefly about the American prairie dog. These call systems are very sophisticated. But they're not language, so is any animal actually capable of language? Well, to a great degree, it depends what you mean by the word language. Now, when you look at a brain, it's a little hard to see these structures on the human-sized model brain we often use here, but they're a lot easier to see on this double-sized medical school teaching brain here, all right? Double size, obviously, nobody has a brain this big. But if you look over here, and it's on the left in about 85% of human beings, this structure here that's blue, and these colors obviously are artificial. They're doing the same job as colors on a map, just to show you the different regions. This blue structure here, this is Broca's area, and it's the area of human speech production. Just as down here, this part of this red area, I wish they'd done different colors, but this part of this red is the human speech reception area, Wernicke's area. It's interesting where these areas are. Wernicke's area here is right next to the auditory cortex, here in the temporal lobe of the brain under the temple, where we do our hearing, okay? And as to our speech center here, Broca's area, well, look how close it is to parts of the motor cortex that control the tongue, the jaw, and the lips, exactly where you'd want this very, very close distance to be. Just as we see the close distance between speech interpretation, speech reception, and hearing, we see a similarly close distance here, a lot of neural connection there, between the mouth and the Broca's area. And as we've already seen, though, we have here the control for the lips and the face, and other stuff up here handles the face here, okay, so from here to here is face. But right up here is the controls for the human hand, and it's very, very close to these controls for the face and the speech centers, which is probably why humans are so good at learning sign languages. We spoke in our previous video about the sign language for the hearing impaired, but we also see this in non-hearing impaired people all over the world. People who have developed various forms of manual sign languages. A really epic example of that. The indigenous peoples of North America, some of the sign languages that were developed where the oral language couldn't be mutually understood between different groups, the sign language could. So this is a very useful thing. And it turns out that it's a good bet anyway, that the close manual, the close proximity of the manual controls to the facial controls, to the mouth controls, probably has something to do with the reason we can do these kinds of communication with our hands. But can any of the non-human animals do any of this? Well, it depends who you talk to. Because if your idea of language has to be a living creature with a Broca's area and a Wernicke's area and the interconnections, well, you're pretty much out of luck. There was a paper some years ago that showed that rhesus monkeys had some tendency in the left hemisphere to make a neural response to the calls of their own species. Okay, so you've got that going for you. Maybe there's some evolutionary route way, way back there, tens of millions of years ago. But really, no other living creature has these. So if that's your definition of language, you're pretty much out of luck. But if your definition of language is, are creatures doing things that are productive and open that have displacement? Well, we saw all the terrible problems we have with this. Displacement as defined, well, can you include migratory behaviors? It's very difficult. So what we really need is some unambiguous way of looking at what happens if an animal is trying to use language. Because communication systems are very complicated. In our last video, I was perhaps a little too facetious about communication in humpback whales. I just attribute that to the fact that I've seen too many people being completely reverent about whales. Sit somewhere in a beautiful room with their legs crossed, listening, sort of possibly altering their state of consciousness while listening to the wonderful songs of the whales. I'm not sure you really want to be reverent about anything you're trying to study. That certainly includes whales. Personally, I like whales. I've gone to watch them. I'm delighted that humans are no longer using their bodies for clean lamp oil and possibly extremely punitive undergarments they used to be used for women. But ultimately, the whale doesn't want to be underestimated. Well, maybe it does, I don't know. We shouldn't underestimate these whales, because humpback whales are putting out sounds that may be more complex than those of any other living creature. Okay? And these sounds do change. They have that quality of productivity. Now, a bit more about humpback whales. They make two broad classes of sounds. One's are little beeps and chirps and squeaks that they seem to use for everyday life. And the others are these amazing songs, okay? They can involve a variety of phrases that may go on for minutes upon minutes. The whole song may go on for 20 minutes or half an hour. It may be repeated many times over a 24-hour period. And every year, as we've already seen, these songs in the migratory whales that have perhaps been studied the most, those that migrate from Alaska down to Maui, there to the Lahaina roads and back. Not only do the songs change every year, which gives us this quality of productivity, of novelty, but the songs also seem to be learned by the entire culture, the entire group, the entire tribe, whatever you want to call it, of those particular whales, that pod of whales and their associates. It used to be thought that the songs are only sung by the males. It turns out that's not necessarily true, but most of the songs are sung by the young individual males. And one hypothesis about this, and it might very well be true, is this complexity of the sounds. It may have something to do with sexual selection. The females may prefer the males who produce the most complex songs, and if so, well, good for them. They get to mate more. It's sort of the same sort of thing, I suppose, as humans being attracted to musicians, whether or not the musicians are going to go anywhere. That's a different topic. But suffice to say that these whales are really going places, okay? Now, why it's really important right now, since right now at the time of this production, it's May 2025, and recently a group of scientists, including scientists from SETI, okay, the folks interested in communicating with the space aliens, if any, okay? Well, they've just managed, apparently, to communicate with a humpback whale. The internet is full of this wonderful conversation. Well, they did send out some contact signals, the signals the whales send to say, hi, I'm there, basically. And the whale would respond back when they did it. So we've got that going for us. But as far as the whale, going to something like going to be or not to be, that is the whale question, we're not really clear on this, all right? Well, we wouldn't expect to be, would we? Because field research can only go so far. You're out in the field with the animals, and in my experience, if you're doing land-based field research, the animal is in a bush. It's always in a bush. I don't know how I'll find. You can be in the middle of the Arctic; it'll find a bush. And I suppose, if you're an angry enough scientist, I suppose you could, set fire to that bush. You would discover that your animal was gone and it was in another bush. All right. So field research has inherent difficulties in it, which is the animals do whatever the hell they feel like. So we do need some laboratory corroboration of these things, and the difficulty is getting a whale into a laboratory is a real problem. Laboratories simply aren't that big. They're not suited to whales, are they? Put a whale in an average laboratory where the walls will collapse and the whole place will smell like fish, so it's not going to go very well. But other animals can be put in laboratories, and they have been, and under laboratory conditions, controlled conditions, and they have been. And obviously, as humans started to look just after the Second World War, over the latter part of the 20th century, up to about the 70s or 80s, when much of this research calmed down, what we want to look at is the great apes. Because we're very closely allied to the great apes, aren't we? We have the genetics, it depends who you talk to, but the genetics are overwhelmingly shared between humans and chimpanzees and gorillas. Orangutans are a little farther off, a different evolutionary line of creature. But the fact is the great apes are, well, orangutans look like us, and in fact their name, orangutan, it means man, I should say person, I guess, but it means man of the woods, okay? The idea of, I've heard this concept in other parts of the world, that orangutans actually could speak if they wanted to, but they don't because they don't want to be set to work. And now I don't know if anybody actually believes that. It's usually said in a joking manner. But they're damn smart animals, these orangutans, and we have quite a few genes in common with them. We have a hell of a lot with the chimps and the gorillas. So the basic concept is, fair enough, maybe they don't have a Broca's area and a Wernicke's area in exactly the right spots. But the brain, even though it's about 1/3 the size, okay, of a human brain, the brain is probably, looks similar. The organization of the lobes is similar. Well, maybe we could teach these things to talk. And it was done. Got over 60 years ago now. A couple called the Hayes. Well over about 70 years. Excuse me. A couple called the Hayes raised a poor little chimpanzee named Vicky. All right. Now nobody in their right mind, frankly, works with adult chimpanzees because they tend to charge at extraordinary speed. They're incredibly strong, and they do tend to rip pieces off people when they're in a bad mood. All right. So the chimps you see on TV, people think chimps are this big. They're huge. Okay, but the young are little and they're cute, and that way you can work with them because they're not quite as likely to rip you several new whatever you would not want to be ripped. Well, anyway, Vicky, excuse me, the poor little chimp, Vicky, was trained by the Hayes for several years. And several years of intensive training of imitation and molding, which I guess involves yanking on the lips. I have no idea how hard. Vicky managed to learn 4 words: mama, papa, cup, and up. That was it. Okay? And to me, the cup sounds more or less like, and the cup sounds more like, the papa sound, excuse me, goes like, and the cup is more or less, so it's not terribly good, and I can't do the imitation very well. But the fact is, when you showed her a cup, she would do that, and when she'd go, now the problem with the sound is, this is a sound chimpanzees make on their own, in their own communication, when they want something from another chimp, and the other chimp will or will not scream at them or possibly pass them some maggoty monkey meat, whatever they're after. So the point is, Vicky, all she really did was learn to condition a couple of sounds she might make anyway. Keep in mind that a chimp's mouth is very different from that of a human. The human mouth has flexibility for speech. The chimp simply does not. So she wasn't able to learn any words. And basically the assumption seems to have been, okay, apes are stupid. Let's see what's on TV as soon as it's invented. Well, Alan Gardner, who I knew very well, I didn't know him very well, I know he's a very good man, I think. He and his wife Beatrice raised a chimpanzee named Washoe, and they did it right, because what Alan Gardner did was a remarkable thing for students of psychology. He actually looked at what kind of creature he was dealing with. Okay? Chimpanzees in the wild don't like to make a lot of sound. Now, the males will leap around and scream and display when it's relatively safe, but the last thing you want if you're a chimpanzee is to be found by the leopards. And so a lot of the sounds are relatively quiet. And so, now they do make verbalizations, but a lot of verbalizations are very brief and short. Okay, so the leopards have a little trouble triangulating on you. Not that leopards are out there in some sort of campaign of anti-chimpanzees, but it's not really all that safe to be advertising, "Hi there, I'm made out of meat," when you're surrounded by carnivores, all right? So a lot of chimpanzee communication is gestural. It involves contact. And that's why the Gardners, Alan and Beatrice, decided to train the chimpanzee Washoe in American Sign Language. And it worked. Okay, she learned well over 100 signs. Well, there's a bit of controversy there, but well over 100 signs. Not a problem in the world. And she even seems to have had a bit of productivity. Seeing a watermelon, something like that, signing water fruit, seeing a Washoe may have one of the other chips, but pointing and going water bird, which is a swan or a goose on a lake. So, and she was able to verbalize things. Okay, she'd verbalize, please chase Washoe, things like that. Please play, etc. She'd ask for food all the time. Okay, she'd name food and ask for the food. Have a wonderful time. Well, Washoe seemed to be doing American Sign Language, and she was doing a hell of a lot better than a few sort of signs of mama, papa, cup, and up. She was really quite good at it. Now, eventually, Washoe wound up living in retirement with other chimpanzees, and she had an adopted son that she seems to have tried to teach some signs to. She was seen molding his hands, etc. And indeed, apparently without human intervention, this young chimpanzee learned several dozen, I hate to give you exact numbers because they vary like crazy, but several dozen signs of American Sign Language from the other chimpanzees. And some of the psychologists were very happy about this. Oh my gosh, we're looking at cultural transmission, etc., etc. One quite renowned psychologist in this area was kind of angling to please give us a couple thousand acre place where the chimpanzees could live and we could help them, we can train them, okay? And what kind of chilled my blood is he said we could train them to farm. So I'm kind of seeing huge numbers of involuntary chimpanzee laborers growing the turnips or something. I'm sure that's not what he was suggesting, but the chimpanzees seem to be having a wonderful time with this American Sign Language, and so Alan Gardner, really, and then other people took this on the road, seems to have figured it out. You use a gestural language, and there's no question that American Sign Language is a true language. It has all the qualities of any other language, even in terms of language development, which we'll be talking about developmental issues later in this series. Language development, it develops the same way as any human language. So although American Sign Language was invented from the get-go, it's absolutely a language, and the chimpanzees are signing away about water fruit and water bird and pass the strawberries and so on and so forth, having a wonderful time. Well, chimpanzee, a number of these chimps were taught how to do this. Very expensive research, by the way. I'm not sure you could even get the funding today if people were wanting to do it. But one of the reasons a lot of people stopped doing it happened in the laboratory of a psychologist named Terrace. Now, Terrace raised a chimp, excuse me, called Nim, as in Nim Chimpsky, the great linguist, Noam Chomsky, Nim Chimpsky. Some idea of the high-level humor in this field? Get it? Ha. Well, anyway, Nim, other ape language people, psychologists and anthropologists, said that Nim was so dumb he should have been named Dim. Because although he learned quite a few signs, Terrace's idea was, first of all, his original idea was quite ambitious. It's a kind of idea that people dreamt of, since Dr. Dolittle and the Tarzan book. Somehow we can talk to the animals quite literally. The idea was maybe you could take the chimp into the forest, the great rainforest of Congo, Rwanda, places where chimpanzees grow wild, and have the Nim explain their behaviors to him, maybe serve as a bit of an interpreter. It's a beautiful dream. But pretty much all Nim did was a few verbalizations, me Nim, me Nim, and somebody say you bought some food, Nim, and Nim would name the bits of food, and he'd eat the food. Well, Terrace analyzed 20,000 of these interactions, he and his students, and he determined that really Nim wasn't using language in any normal sense. Most of the verbalizations were one or two words, and basically all he was doing was signing to get things. And if he wasn't getting his fruit right now, he'd make a bunch of random signs. At one point he used the word cat, completely out of context, talking to his trainers. There's no cats in the area. Maybe he's just signing away until somebody gives him some food, okay? Well, so Terrace comes up with quite a campaign, really, of, chimps can't do language at all anyway, so they're meh. And basically, about that point, funding for most ape language studies dried up. This did not endear people to Terrace, and they made a lot of quite mean remarks about him, I still recall. But one of the criticisms were this. First of all, Alan and Beatrice, the Gardners, raised Washoe, and they worked with other chimps as well. They raised them in basically a family sort of setting. They saw them every day. They worked with them every day. It was very much, and they had lots of tickling and playful interactions, the kind of thing chimpanzees do in the wild. Lots of interactions with these individuals, as if they were forming a little troop of their own, mixed of humans and chimpanzees. Terrace's outfit didn't work that way. Nim was taken every day from his home to the laboratory, where to some degree he was drilled and structured interviews, like basically going to a rather strict school every day. And he had, I believe it was 60 trainers in the 4 years the project went on. That's a hell of a lot of trainers. And one of Terrace's critics, I won't go into a lot of names here because there's no real reason to. One of Terrace's critics said, well, the problem is, we don't go answer stupid questions for people that we like every day. We want to work with people we like. It's certainly true that if you've worked in animal behavior, it gives you lots and lots of opportunities to make a total fool of yourself. Okay, you have to not be too concerned with, that's happened to me at one point, with a large vervet monkey swinging back and forth on the necktie that I had to wear that particular day, but never again. You notice that many ape researchers with long hair tend to bundle the hair into very tight braids or cut their hair short before they go back out there with those animals. And for heaven's sake, I gotta admit, I never ever in my life and in any setting ever saw, I did not know him personally, but never saw Herb Terrace without this wonderful necktie. Most ape researchers and monkey researchers, you get the damn tie off as soon as possible, and you probably want to, because frankly it smells a lot like monkey. But anyway, suffice to say that there were all these criticisms of Terrace's work, and Terrace criticized all the other work, and on this went, all right? The Rumbaus, Sue Savage Rumbaugh and her husband, the Rumbaus, they trained a chimp called Lana in a very different way. They trained her to push a keyboard to get various verbalizations out. So she could say to the keyboard something like, please machine, give Lana piece of apple, or please machine, give Lana banana, things of that nature. And it worked. And she seemed to be doing beyond Herb Terrace's gold standard, because, okay, fair enough, if the apes aren't really doing language, are they at least putting a syntactic order here. They're at least giving us some kind of grammatical thing. And certainly, please give Lana apple is different from please give apple Lana, right? She was doing that, and yet Lana was not able, once she'd had the food, even to talk about the food, to identify the food. She could ask for it with the machine, but they're very, very limited here, not in a normative linguistic sense. There's some other wonderful studies out of that laboratory where you had the Rumbaugh and Savage Rumbaugh laboratory, where you had apes actually communicating with each other. So this one needs to get the food out of this little lockbox. He needs one of 6 tools. He can talk to the other chimp using a symbolic keyboard. Again, the other chimp gives him the tool he wants, which in this case is a little key. You can open the box. So lots, and then they share the food. It's very nice. Lots of this kind of thing going on. But is it truly language? It's a very difficult question, really. But one ape that seems to put paid to the whole question, she seems absolutely doing the language, was poor Koko. All right, she was a gorilla raised by Francine Patterson, one name we should use, in laboratory setting, because she lived in a trailer, really. Well, Koko turned out to be absolutely brilliant. Okay, probably thousands of signs, about 1,000 signs or thereabouts used, a couple other thousand supposedly understood. Okay, understand. I'm passing on stuff that I have read, whether it's, people interpret things, all right? But Koko seemed to be using language in very real ways. There's a wonderful film of her looking at an old magazine with a cigarette ad in it. It's signing smoke, okay? She started referring to bracelets as, to rings, finger rings, as finger bracelets, okay? And she started making these various word combinations, okay? One point, apparently she used to call herself a monkey, and then you had to say, no, Koko's not a monkey, Koko's a beautiful gorilla, okay? And so otherwise she'd sulk, was the idea. And, well, maybe she was making a joke. That was certainly the Patterson Group's interpretation. Maybe she was just making a mistake and calling herself a monkey. That was a lot of other people's interpretation. So you do have a lot of really quite anecdotal stuff coming out of the Project Koko, the Koko project. But there's absolutely no question that she would say things about love, and she would talk about, I shouldn't say that, but she made some fairly complex utterances, many of them pertaining to emotion, etc., etc. And so Koko, it looked like she was doing pretty well. Her IQ, various estimates of it out there, okay, in the laboratory they were saying she was somewhere between 85 and 95. Other people would say she's down at 70. The average figure you hear bandied about is 78, but whatever it is. IQ tests were really biased against Koko, okay? At one point, she had to pick the 2 things you eat, and one of them was, I believe, was an apple. Well, she picked a flower instead of the ice cream sundae, because she'd never seen an ice cream sundae, and she ate flowers all the damn time. So the point is, that point had to go against poor Koko. So maybe she's smarter than we think she was. But anything that's actually able to interact with humans in this manner is doing a pretty good job. So, is this truly language? Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Okay. Now, certainly, if you want a Broca's and a Wernicke's area, it's not. And certainly if you want the animal to be, shouting, it's a far, far better thing I do, well, it's not either. Because to my knowledge, it's only to my knowledge, ape language really has been pretty much about very concrete things, very frequently devoted to food or to play. Ape will go, please tickle, or chase Pongo, chase whatever the ape's name is. It's limited to basically that kind of low grade, well, I shouldn't say low grade, but that kind of social interaction, and of course to the never-ending quest for at least pretty good food. Well, as far as I know, it's often bandied around the internet that no ape ever asked a question. Then you get a whole bunch of people quoting from various religious books. It's quite exciting. But they ask questions all the time. Okay? Please chase is a question. Chase me. I want to play. Okay? Tickle. Please tickle. Want tickle. Want tickle. Want tickle. Okay? Well, that's not very grammatical, is it? If your kid was saying that, you'd probably be taking him off to the doctor. Okay? Because interactions like food, want food, give food, tickle, play, tickle, Koko, want kitten, want play, want tickle. They gave Koko kittens. I wouldn't have wanted to be the test kitten. I can think of a certain problem resembling a tube of toothpaste. But Koko actually was a very nice kitten. She would cuddle the kittens. She had a wonderful time with the kittens. Well, it's not that linguistic, is it? Okay. But see, that seems to be sort of where we are. Okay, no, we don't have a Broca's area and a Wernicke's area in these animals. And we do seem to have a sort of proto-linguistic behavior, but is it language? Well, you can almost see it as on the evolutionary line from ape to human. Except there is no evolutionary line from ape to human. Humans and apes, people have it. That's a 19th century idea that some people still have. If I never hear that question again, if humans came from apes, how come there are still apes? If I never hear that again, I'll be very happy. If I do hear it again, I might, frankly, scream like an ape. Okay, because no, there were common ancestors, and today, never mind the missing link. That's a very old concept. Today we've got so damn many links, it's hard to tell which ones were actually it. So there's no question humans and the great apes evolved from common ancestors. But no human ever evolved from an ape, so you don't have this wonderful concept, really, of the chimp becoming you get from monkey to ape to humans, etc., that wonderful cartoon. You don't really have that. What you have, evolution is really not a linear thing. It's a bush. We're over here. Chimps and gorillas are over here. But they're smart, so they have a brain kind of like ours, even though it's a third the right size. Our size, we're the humans, so we get to decide what's right. Not a third of the human size. But then there are dolphins. I don't know why people expect dolphins to be highly intelligent. Now, apparently they are, but why you'd expect it, I don't know. Because what dolphins do is deal with fish, and having done a lot of fishing myself, all I can tell you is it's not really a deeply intellectual task. In fact, it's quite relaxing, really. Then you get to eat the fish. Dolphins do have an enormous cortex, but a lot of it is devoted to their incredible sound processing system. So you're not necessarily going to say that. I kind of have a feeling, and feel free to disagree. Hang on, yep, this is still America. Feel free to disagree. I have a feeling it may have to do with an old TV show called Flipper. It hasn't been on TV for years and years, but these things kind of enter human consciousness, okay? The show Flipper was set in the Everglades for no very good reason. This ranger and his two really stupid sons had a dolphin named Flipper who was their friend, and every week Sandy and Bud, those sons, would get stuck in the Everglades or fall in the water or about to be eaten by a shark, and the dolphin Flipper would come and save them. She kept saving the hell out of them. She'd save them, and sometimes I guess after they got wounded, she'd fill out the insurance forms for them. No, she didn't do that. But and also dolphins, they're smiling. Don't they always look happy? They smile. Well, they can't help it. That's what their skull is shaped like. Eh? And it is true that dolphins have been seen pushing swimmers in distress back to shore. They've also pushed swimmers who weren't in distress at all back to shore, and occasionally they push people out to sea. Apparently they just like to push things. Okay? We do know that dolphins are intensely social creatures. They form these little gangs and gaggles. They can hunt in a group in a very complex pattern. There's a film I saw many years ago. I don't know where it would be today, but a particular type of dolphin had harassed, I believe it was an Atlantic bottlenose dolphin, and the next day a group of Atlantic bottlenose dolphins came back and they actually killed the dolphin which had done the harassment. So you've kind of got, if you know your West Side Story, you've kind of got dolphin jets and bottlenose jets and spotted, what was the other one? Jets and sharks. Well, that's not a good thing for dolphins, I guess. But then they will also combine to fight off sharks. So dolphins have a lot going on. But why do you think it has to do with language? Well, I don't know, but it was tried. Dolphins, unlike whales, can be put in a tank. Okay, and they were. At Kewalo Basin in Hawaii some years ago, a scientist named Herman was studying these guys, and two of the dolphins, to give you some idea of the upbeat nature of the project, one's name was Phoenix, right? Not the large city in the desert, but Phoenix, remember, he was the foster father and hence the teacher of Achilles, very high level. And also, another dolphin is called Akea Kamai. I love that one. Apparently it's Hawaiian for lover of wisdom, so I suspect she loves fish too, but whatever. The point is, these dolphins were taught, well, language. Now, obviously, dolphins can't make signs with those flipper things they got going. So, Phoenix was taught a computer-generated sound language underwater, but the really interesting one from our standpoint of sign language was Akea Kamai. And Akea Kamai was taught this manual language where she could learn and understand commands. Okay? And what she would do then, so you've got things floating in the water. You have a black football and a gray football and a black surfboard and orange surfboard. You get the idea. Okay. Anyway, you could say to Akea Kamai, orange surfboard flipper touch, and she'd go out there and do it. You could say to her, okay, black football tail flip, and she'd go do that with the right object. There's even a command called erase, right? It means disregard the previous statement. So your person is standing here very, very sort of at attention, really big goggles to keep from any facial cues, okay, making these signals. And you say black football flipper touch erase, and okay, come on, just sit there, guys, or float there. Then you could say, okay, black football flipper touch. She'd go and she'd touch the right one. She got right and left very nicely too. She'd go to the surfboard on the right, not the one on the left. So this is getting pretty good. Now, The obvious complaint is, well, it's like marine land or SeaWorld used to be, okay? The dolphins learn a few tricks, and that's what's happening, but no, okay? These animals learn a vocabulary of about 30 signs for an object, names, or nouns, right? And actions, verbs, and modifiers. About 30 signs. So you can make over 1,000 different combinations there. No marine park has ever gotten any or even beginning to be near that in terms of the number of tricks a dolphin or something like a killer whale could learn. They just don't have it. And Herman is right about that. Lou Herman was right about that. These dolphins had learned to put these signs together in a really syntactic manner, okay? Because you could say, and they could do new things too. You put a football in there, they've learned the color, but they've never seen this one before. Then you could say, okay, go gray football, flipper touch. They could do that. Well, so that didn't bother anybody very much. It didn't occur to anybody, well, damn it all, the cortex is completely different from anything in a human. It's gigantic, but a lot of it is about auditory stuff. But how the hell is a dolphin doing this whole language business? For a while, I believe they may still be trying to make sounds. The dolphin can make sounds back and be wonderful. Very interesting to various military, naval forces would like the dolphins to be, carrying landmines and things. That, as far as I know, was not going on up there at the University of Hawaii at the time. But the point is that people don't have a problem because dolphins have a huge cortex, they got a huge brain, and Flipper kept rescuing Bud and Sandy. But then there are sea lions. This particular sea lion was named Rocky, which doesn't teach you much because as far as I can tell, all sea lions wind up being named Rocky. I don't know why. Somebody should study that one, okay? But this was I'm Cal State professor, and Cal State, we're a university where the budget is not where you might want it to be. Nobody's buying us any damn dolphins, not even back in the 1970s, but they did get hold of a sea lion. If you've been on San Francisco, Pier 39 is infested with the things. You get the right permits, it's possible to work with a sea lion. It certainly was back then. And a psychologist named Ron Schusterman quickly became the bane of the dolphin people's existence. Because Rocky the damn sea lion was learning all the same behaviors. I remember a quote from Schusterman. He said, well, basically Rocky's doing about what the dolphins are doing because he sat there with his Hayward, which they've changed the name of the university, but they're on the San Francisco Bay. It's a lot chillier than Hawaii. So he's wearing parkas and fishing boots, But Rocky's there with his little nose on your fishing boot, and you could say, okay, Rocky, go for it, black football, flipper touch, and out he'd go, okay? He learned linguistic distinctions of what a ball was. He learned that black balls and white balls were still balls, and little balls and big balls still balls. They get the distinction between black and white. He picked up gray with hardly any pause. Well, sea lions are not smart animals. They're about as bright, maybe a little brighter than a dog. Now, I don't mean your personal dog, who I'm sure is brilliant, can argue cases before courts and possibly pilot the space shuttle. I'm talking about, for example, my last dog, who died some time ago. It's quite sad. But anyway, he after living to the ripe old age of at least 12 years, he finally mastered anogenital sniffing with other dogs. That's about as far as many dogs go, okay? So dolphins, okay, maybe they are mind in the waters. Maybe they are this brilliant thing. Besides, always remember Flipper. But a sea lion? What the hell? How is an animal is about as bright as a dog learning linguistic generalities? Hell of a problem. And it may be the only way to solve it is to look at some of the research, which is frankly more anecdotal. It appears in the literature, but on the attempt to teach language to orangutans. Now, these again are a great ape of Southeast Asia and the islands of Indonesia, what is today's Indonesia. Very large animals. They primarily eat fruit, and that means they need a big territory, okay? Because there isn't as much fruit in the jungle as you might think. These are big animals, okay? And they tend to live under solitary conditions. Large male orangutans have been shown with radio collars to walk enormous distances across that great island of Borneo, for example. They're really solitary creatures. Now, that said, the male and female are right there in the woods when spring comes. Obviously, they get together, they love each other very much, they have the baby, but they take off as soon as they can. And as soon as daddy takes off, walking across Borneo or whatever it is, and, mommy with the baby, well, the baby gets big enough to be a bit of a threat to mommy's fruit. He goes off someplace else and finds his own damn fruit. So they're relatively solitary creatures. Now, you wouldn't think so. In some of the old films of one of the great scholars of orangutans, Birute Galdikas-Brindamore, her group, you'd see the orangs at this orangutan center, and they were together. They were kind of functioning and playing together, and they don't normally do that. Okay, But lots of animals have a high degree of general plasticity, the behavioral variability available to organisms. That word plasticity has a very specific definition in neuroscience. That's not how we're using it here. We're using it as being able to vary your behavior, being able to do different kinds of things. And lots of animals, we're going to devote one of these videos to this in the near future, lots and lots of animals have quite a lot of plasticity. Take domestic cats, okay? They're solitary, obligatory carnivores. They've been called hypercarnivores because they have to go after the meat and they live alone. And yet, if you've ever lived with a group of cats, as I have, you discover that no, you don't have several solitary hypercarnivores. Pretty soon, you have a junta, okay? You have a group of cats, and they have an agenda, okay? Pretty soon, the group of cats is pretty clear on how they're going to get the food out of their human servants, and before you know it, the cats are sort of, well, you've got a kind of ruling group of cats here. Well, if cats have that kind of plasticity with tiny little damn brains, okay? Orangutans sure as hell do. They can live in a group if you want them to. And they can even learn to use their sign language to ask for a bit of social interaction. There's a wonderful film of one orangutan who was a subject of research, his name is Shantak, asking his trainer to chase Shantak. He enjoys playing, okay? But one of the things that the orangutan researchers noticed was that much more than the chimps and the gorillas. Now, chimps and gorillas are very big on food. They're constantly asking about food. Okay, they never ask whither away. They never ask what is it like being a gorilla. They never ask, okay, how do I really feel about bananas? What they do ask is, give me banana. Okay, but they do a lot more social stuff. The orangs seem extremely devoted to the food. Okay, and granted, you could say, want chase Chantak, Chantak may go chase, but then he goes food. Okay, no, play Chantak, want play. I'm making this up. Play, and Chantak goes food, give food. Okay, you might say, play now, food now. Well, what might be going on here? And it's only a might. It's only a might. Can't prove this. But see, humans have psychology, and humans are psychologists, and there's a psychology of psychology. And that means we tend to look at the phenomena that other humans tell us are the most interesting. When we think about biology today, an awful lot of what we think about is genetics, okay? And the genes do this, the genes do that. Lots of people believe in individual genes for behavior, when in fact, no single gene for any behavior has ever actually been demonstrated. If you actually make a bit of a study of the molecular biology of the gene and how genetics works, there's an awful lot of intermediary steps between the DNA carrying the genes and even something as simple as alpha and beta proteins. There's a lot of steps there, and to then combine all of those proteins into somebody who either becomes a serial killer or a pole vaulter. You see the problem. There's an awful lot of steps there. Okay, but it is true. You can now you can, I guess you can put. This is not my area, but I guess you can put halibut genes into a tomato, and you get a tomato that lasts forever. But I'm not sure why you'd want it, since it tastes a bit like a fish-flavored halibut tomato thing. But you can do it, and people are very fascinated by genetics, okay? People don't think as much about ecology. Okay, the balance of living creatures operating in the real world. We don't think as much about that. But look at the kinds of animals that pick up language. Intensely social creatures, all of them. Chimpanzees, gorillas, pick up language, and they use it to talk about food, but also about social things. Orangs have this great plasticity. Yeah, they can talk about social things, but it seems like they'd much rather be talking about food, these solitary creatures. Dolphins, they live in intensely incorporated pods, okay, intense group dynamics, and constantly shifting group dynamics. It requires you to really understand what a group is doing. They can learn a form of linguistic communication. And then sea lions, you can, talk away to your dog. Dogs are social, but not always sea lions. Now, just a minute. I looked it up. Sea lions are relatively solitary. They are, at sea. But when they're on the breeding beaches, the relationships between sea lions become very intense very quickly. There's not a lot of space, and there's a lot of breeding action going on. These are creatures that may not be social most of the time, but they're social as all hell the rest of the time. And yet even things, solitary hypercarnivores, obligatory carnivores like cats, have enough plasticity to form a little tuna-eating junta in your house here, but they don't do it as well as something that is a group-dwelling creature, a creature whose normative ecology is the group. And I think this may be really the most important lesson that these studies have taught us. Now, today there really is not enough money to be doing these ape language research studies anymore. And even if there was, you had so many people objecting to this. How dare you, live with these animals and take care of them their entire lives and extend their lifespan and give them lots of food and wonderful experiences, because it's not natural. You'd rather they were out in the natural world grubbing their food off the ground and then being eaten by a leopard. So I'm not quite sure how the ethics there work, but apparently people think they do. But ultimately, these studies have passed into history, but they've told us something of great importance, I think, psychologically, for the entire field of psychology and all the related behavioral sciences, which is that you can't afford tunnel vision. It's not just the genetics. Hey, chimpanzees are like us. Hey, gorillas are pretty much like us. Well, orangutans are kind of like us, but they're over there. What you need to look at, I think, is the creature's normative lifeways. How does it actually function in its normal, real world? And what happens to that functionality when you put it into a wholly extraordinary environment for it, one in which you're making it do things that seem to fit the concepts of human language, in this case artificial language, of sign language, or the wonderful Rumbaugh and Savage Rumbaugh laboratory where they have the computerized gadgetry, or the dolphins out there with their erase and black football flipper touch having a hell of a time. But ultimately a damn sea lion was able to learn these linguistic behaviors. It would seem to be the, if you will, societal nature of the animal involved in developing these behaviors, much more than its raw intelligence. So that leads us to a very interesting question. What exactly is intelligence? And we'll be dealing with that in a later video in this series. Hope you found this interesting and useful. I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps, and this is The World of the Mind.